October 26, 1942, north of the Santa Cruz Islands. The dawn sky over the Pacific is a dull gray wash of cloud and exhaust. The aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CV-6, the Big E, rides the rolling sea as the last fully operational American carrier in the Pacific. Below decks, the smell of fuel oil, sweat, and burnt cordite lingers from the day before. Above, radar screens flicker with new contacts, unmistakable signs of another incoming Japanese strike. AT-0944 hours. Lookouts aboard Enterprise spot dots on the horizon. Dive bombers from the carrier Shokaku. General quarters sounds across the ship. Men sprint to their stations, bulkhead doors slam, and the crew braces for the next wave in what will become the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. Anti-aircraft guns open up, filling the air with a storm of black flak bursts. AT-0958. The first Aichi D-3 of Val dive bomber peels off from 12,000 feet, its siren screaming through the air. Below, Chief Petty Officer Frank O'Flaherty, a veteran machinist's mate responsible for the carrier's auxiliary systems, is in the engineering spaces. When the klaxon sounds, he yells for his repair parties to be ready. Hoses, patching tools, portable pumps, all vital when steel starts melting and pipes burst. Seconds later, the ship convulses. A 250-kilogram bomb tears through the flight deck near the forward elevator, detonating deep inside the ship. Fire bursts through passageways, ripping through aviation fuel lines. The lights flicker out. A shockwave of hot air and smoke rushes down the corridors. Above, planes crash and burn. Below, men are thrown off their feet. Enterprise's decks tilt 5 degrees to port. Alarms shriek. Fires on hangar deck 2 and 3. Ruptured fire mains amidships. Electrical power lost in multiple sectors. The carrier, battered and smoking, begins to list dangerously. The bridge reports, forward magazines heating, request flooding authorization. Captain Osborne B. Hardison, acting commander, orders counterflooding immediately to save the ship from capsizing. On the lower decks, men drag fire hoses across knee-deep water, but the mains are shattered. In compartment after compartment, the ship's firefighting system has failed. Chief O'Flaherty knows that if the fires reach the aviation fuel tanks beneath the flight deck, the ship will go up like a floating bomb. He calls his men to the forward repair station. Grab spanners, cutters, anything you can use. We're rigging new lines. He doesn't shout orders for glory. He's done this before, aboard Enterprise during earlier raids in the Solomon Islands campaign. But this is different. This time, the ship is bleeding from multiple wounds, and the Japanese are still coming. AT-1030, a second wave of Val bombers strikes. One bomb hits near the aft elevator, tearing through the hangar deck, exploding next to the after engine room. Steel plates buckle. The lights go out again. Power to the aft pumps is severed. Enterprise's own after-action report later recorded. Main fire mains destroyed by direct hits. Water pressure in forward sectors reduced to 0. Local control measures initiated by damage control parties. O'Flaherty's team crawls through smoke and twisted piping. The temperature climbs past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. They can barely breathe through their wet rags. Water from broken lines gushes into the compartments, mixing with oil and fuel. Using sections of intact pipe, they begin rigging makeshift bypasses to reroute seawater from auxiliary pumps into the broken fire main system. It's crude, it's risky, but it's the only way to keep pressure in the hoses. Above them, Japanese planes continue to circle. Enterprise's flight deck is cratered, her elevators jammed, but her anti-aircraft batteries keep firing. The carrier Hornet, CV-8, her sister ship, is burning and sinking miles away. If Enterprise goes down too, the U.S. Pacific Fleet will have no operational carriers left in the theater. The engineering compartments, Electrical Chief Warrant Officer J.E. Vale, and O'Flaherty coordinate under emergency lanterns. Together, they trace melted circuits, re-establishing partial power to the fire pumps using spare leads and jury-rigged switches. Sparks flash as they reconnect fuses. Slowly, lights flicker back to life in the forward hangar to BY noon. Reports filter in. Fires contained forward, but spreading aft. Aviation ordnance is cooking off. O'Flaherty's men, most from Repair Party Number 5, drag hoses through the hangar, dousing flames amid fallen aircraft and twisted steel. Every few minutes, explosions rattle the ship as stored ammunition ignites. Men are thrown to the deck, get up, and keep fighting the blaze. A damage report at 12:45 reads grimly. Number 2 elevator inoperable. Fire mains rerouted through emergency patch. Aft power circuits unstable. Flooding contained in sections D402 and D414. Ship remains under own power. The crew refuses to abandon ship. Enterprise, though crippled, is still alive. Held together by sweat, luck, and the relentless improvisation of men like O'Flaherty. Outside, smoke columns rise thousands of feet into the air. The Japanese pilots, circling above, report that the American carrier is finished. But as they turn back toward their fleet, Enterprise, scarred, burning, listing, still plows forward, her engines beating through the Pacific to BY nightfall. The fires begin to die down. The air is thick with oil smoke, and the decks are littered with burned debris. O'Flaherty and his team, blackened with soot, rest against the bulkheads, too exhausted to speak. They've been at it for nearly 12 hours. Below decks, the sound of pumps thumping rhythmically in the dark is the only sign that Enterprise still breathes. October 26, 1942, 2,320 hours. The sea outside is calm again, but inside the hull of the USS Enterprise, CV-6, chaos continues in near darkness. The faint hum of auxiliary generators echoes through the lower decks, accompanied by the hiss of steam escaping ruptured pipes. Water seeps through seams along the bulkheads. Some compartments still flooded from counterflooding earlier in the day. Chief Petty Officer Frank O'Flaherty, his uniform scorched and torn, moves with a lantern through the engineering levels. The smell of oil and burning paint is still heavy in the air. His team, Repair Party Number 5, follows behind, dragging hoses, spools of wiring, and cutting tools salvaged from the wrecked workshops. Every man is drenched in sweat despite the midnight chill outside and the hours since the last attack. Captain Osborne B. Hardison and Commander Truxton Hare, the ship's damage control officer, have issued a grim order: keep the Enterprise afloat at all costs. The carrier is still within range of Japanese search planes, and though the air raids have stopped for now, another dawn could bring more. If power and fire mains aren't restored, a single spark could ignite what remains of the aviation fuel tanks beneath the hangar. O'Flaherty studies the schematic tacked to the bulkhead, a faded diagram of the ship's piping system. The main fire main along the port side is destroyed. The secondary line, running along the starboard compartments, has multiple breaks. There's no official procedure for this situation. No manual describes how to rebuild a carrier's plumbing network with nothing but spare couplings and scrap pipe. He radios the bridge. Repair 5 to Damage Control Central. Request permission to open auxiliary seawater intake through number 3 bilge pump for fire main bypass. Commander Hare replies, his voice hoarse. Granted, Chief. Do what you have to. Just don't flood the engines. The men go to work. In compartment D417, Petty Officer R.G. Mixon and J.C. Snyder lower themselves into waist-deep water to weld a broken flange. Sparks flash across the narrow space as O'Flaherty steadies the light. The patch holds barely. Through the improvised bypass, seawater pressure rises again, trickling into the damaged fire main. It's enough to bring 2 hoses back online on the hangar deck. Above them, The damage control crews continue clearing wreckage from the flight deck. Burnt-out F-4F Wildcats and SBD Dauntless lie scattered across twisted steel. The deck planking, charred and splintered, is being replaced with temporary steel sheets salvaged from below. Men from Repair Party Number 3 man portable pumps, draining the flooded compartments to lighten the ship's list. AT-0140. O'Flaherty's team manages to reroute electrical power from the forward dynamo to the after pump room. They do it using melted cabling stripped from disabled machinery, spliced and insulated with tape scavenged from radio stores. The moment the circuit connects, the ship's gauges flicker, power restored to auxiliary pumps. A faint cheer breaks out in the dark. It's not just engineering heroics, it's survival. Enterprise's hull still bears 4 major bomb holes, several compartments open to the sea. The ship's internal temperature has dropped, but vaporized fuel and hot wiring create an invisible threat. One spark could trigger a secondary explosion. O'Flaherty orders all electrical repairs done cold, hand-cranked pumps only, until ventilation is restored by dawn. Word spreads that the carrier USS Hornet, Enterprise's sister ship, has been lost. Scuttled under heavy Japanese attack, she slipped beneath the waves only hours earlier. Now Enterprise is truly alone, the last functioning American carrier in the Pacific. Every man aboard understands what that means. If this ship sinks, the U.S. Navy will have no mobile air power east of Pearl Harbor. O'Flaherty doesn't allow time for reflection. He moves aft toward compartment D509, where the bulkhead is bulging outward under water pressure. Using a section of boilerplate, his men reinforce it with braces welded into place. The sound of hammers echoes like gunfire through the hull. One miscalculation, one weak seam, and the sea will come roaring in. AT-0630. The sun rises over the Pacific. Smoke still drifts from Enterprise's battered island. From above, the carrier looks like a scarred, wounded beast limping through gray water. Yet below, the pumps hum steadily, the fires are out, and makeshift wiring glows faintly with power. Bridge logs from that morning record. Damage control parties have established partial pressure to all sectors. Electrical circuits stable. Flight deck operable for limited air operations. A miracle in steel and sweat. When Captain Hardison walks the hangar deck at first light, he stops to look at the damage. Charred aircraft, melted steel frames, hoses snaking through shattered bulkheads. Then he turns to O'Flaherty, who's standing barefoot in the soot. "Chief, you just kept this ship in the war." O'Flaherty simply nods. "A ship like her keeps herself, Captain. We just hold the pieces together." That morning, as the U.S. fleet withdraws eastward, Enterprise's deck crews begin clearing room for incoming aircraft from lost carriers. Her patched-up systems groan and rattle, but they hold. Smoke trails fade into the horizon. The Battle of Santa Cruz is over, but for the Big E, the real fight has only just begun. October 27, 1942. Dawn breaks over a Pacific littered with oil slicks, floating wreckage, and scattered life rafts. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands is officially over. The U.S. Navy has suffered another bitter tactical defeat. USS Hornet, CV-8, lies at the bottom of the sea, and Enterprise is battered almost beyond recognition. Yet, in the cold arithmetic of war, the outcome is more complex, for Japan's air groups, too, have been mauled, their veteran carrier pilots irreplaceable. On the smoking deck of the USS Enterprise, damage control continues around the clock. Chief Petty Officer Frank O'Flaherty and his team have not slept in nearly 36 hours. Their eyes are bloodshot, their clothes stiff with soot and salt. But there's no time to rest. The ship's bulkheads still leak, pumps strain constantly, and the improvised electrical systems that keep the carrier alive could fail at any moment. In the early hours, Admiral Thomas C. Kincaid, commander of Task Force 61, radios his flagship. The message, preserved in official records, reads, "Enterprise is only operational carrier remaining. All possible measures to preserve her integrity and return to port must be taken. On the bridge, Captain Osborne B. Hardison convenes his senior officers. The decision is made. Enterprise will withdraw east toward Noumea, New Caledonia, under escort by the cruiser USS Portland and destroyers USS Smith, USS Maury, and USS Conyngham. Her Air Group 10, under Commander Ramsay D. Whitten, remains partially functional, but flight operations are limited to reconnaissance and defensive patrols. As the carrier limps eastward, O'Flaherty oversees one of the most delicate engineering feats of the Pacific War, keeping a half-dead ship alive at sea. The aft pump room, damaged by the second bomb hit, leaks constantly, forcing his team to maintain manual pumping in shifts. Every 4 hours, men crank portable pumps by hand, bailing out hundreds of gallons to keep the ship's stern above the waves. The log of the damage control officer that day records, Chief O'Flaherty directed jury rigging of auxiliary power to after-steering gear. Improvised patch to fire main held under pressure test. Water ingress reduced to minimal seepage. Crew performance exceptional under fatigue. Meanwhile, topside, deck divisions work to patch holes in the flight deck using steel plates scavenged from wrecked aircraft. Aviation machinists use hand drills and torches, riveting through warped beams as the ship rolls in the swell. The after elevator, completely disabled, is welded in place to prevent collapse. Enterprise's island structure leans slightly, its radar mast twisted, yet communications remain intact thanks to quick rewiring by the radio division. For O'Flaherty's men, the hardest challenge is the ship's internal power grid. The bomb blasts melted dozens of cables inside conduit runs. Without proper insulation, rerouted circuits risk shorting at any time. With almost no spare wire left, they use copper salvaged from damaged motors, stripping it by hand. Using electrical tape scavenged from the radio shack, they wrap and secure each connection, then test the circuit using portable voltmeters. Every flicker of light that returns to the ship is a small victory. On October 28th, as Enterprise crosses into calmer waters, Commander Hare orders a full structural inspection. Divers go overboard to examine the hull. The damage is extensive: multiple shell-sized holes below the waterline, deformed frames, and a hairline crack running 20 feet along the starboard bow. But she's still afloat. By now, the men know what they've accomplished. The ship that Japanese pilots claimed was finished is not only still sailing but capable of recovering aircraft. That morning, 2 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, low on fuel, land on her patched deck. The sight of those planes touching down brings spontaneous cheers across the hangar. Below decks, O'Flaherty sits briefly against a bulkhead, writing in grease pencil across a damaged panel. Temporary feed line, keep pressure steady. He wipes his face with a rag blackened from smoke. His hands are blistered from welding rods and valve wheels, but the system holds steady. AT 1,100 hours. Enterprise's engines slow to half speed. The order comes down to conserve power for the pumps and auxiliary circuits. The ship has become a floating machine of improvisation. Her fire mains rerouted through bilge pumps, her lights powered by patched circuits, her crew kept alive by sheer determination. And the mess hall, men eat cold beans and coffee brewed from evaporated seawater. There's no complaining. Everyone knows the truth. Had the fires not been contained, or had the electrical rerouting failed, the Big E would have joined Hornet on the ocean floor. That night, under a moonless sky, the convoy pushes onward toward Noumea. The wind carries the smell of burnt metal and sea salt through the open hatches. On the flight deck, sailors stand silently, looking at the stars through the haze of smoke still clinging to the ship's island. From the bridge, Captain Hardison radios Pearl Harbor. Enterprise still operational, returning for repairs. Damage extensive, but morale high. That same message would later be read by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet. He would make a simple note in the margin: "The Big E remains our most valuable carrier. Commend engineering and damage control personnel." Extraordinary performance. O'Flaherty doesn't know it yet, but his improvisations, rerouting the mains, rewiring the circuits, will become part of U.S. Navy damage control training manuals for years to come. In the heat, smoke, and salt water of the Pacific, he and his men had proven that human ingenuity could keep a crippled warship alive when every system failed as the battered Enterprise disappears into the eastern horizon, her wake trailing oil and debris. A single truth stands out across the Pacific. America still has one carrier in the fight, because one mechanic refused to let her die. October 30th, 1942, Noumea, New Caledonia. The tropical air is thick with humidity and diesel fumes as the wounded USS Enterprise, CV-6, limps into harbor, her hull streaked with black soot and the acrid smell of burned aviation fuel. Tugs move alongside, guiding the carrier into the bay with slow, deliberate movements. To onlookers from nearby ships, the scene is astonishing. The Big E, struck by 3 bombs, still afloat, still flying her colors as Enterprise eases alongside the repair dock. The Seabees and naval engineers on shore catch sight of the devastation. Flight deck twisted, bulkheads blackened, the island scarred by fire. Yet the flag atop the mast flutters proudly in the sea breeze. She has come home. Chief Petty Officer Frank O'Flaherty and his men, running on adrenaline and black coffee, watch as the first gangways are secured. The smell of fresh bread from shore kitchens drifts across the water, a reminder that they've survived something few thought possible. Within hours, Admiral William F. Halsey, commander of the South Pacific area, sends a message to Captain Osborne B. Hardison aboard Enterprise. To the crew of the Big E, you have done the impossible. You have saved not just a ship, but the faith of a navy. The repairs begin immediately. USS Vestal, AR-4, a repair ship that had survived the attack on Pearl Harbor, ties up alongside to assist. Her engineers, led by Commander W.R. Hedden, begin assessing the damage. They're stunned at what they find. Entire fire mains reconstructed with scrap, electrical systems bypassed through auxiliary circuits, and structural braces welded from torn deck plating, Hedden later recalled in his report. The extent of improvised damage control on the Enterprise defies convention. Her survival was due not to luck, but to a level of ingenuity and discipline rarely seen in any navy. Over the next several days, O'Flaherty and his men work side by side with the Vestal's repair crews. They dismantle their temporary patches one by one, replacing them with proper fittings and reinforced pipework. The heat inside the ship reaches unbearable levels, 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the lower compartments. Yet the work continues around the clock. A young seaman from the repair division later wrote in his diary, "You couldn't walk 5 feet without tripping over hoses and wires, but every man knew what those lines meant. They meant she was still alive." Above deck, carpenters rebuild portions of the flight deck using Douglas fir planking shipped from Pearl Harbor. Welders work under the glare of arc lights, patching bomb holes with thick steel plates. Air Group 10's surviving planes are flown off to nearby bases for maintenance, while new aircraft begin to arrive. Wildcats, Avengers, and Dauntless, all hastily ferried in to restore the carrier's fighting strength. For O'Flaherty, the hardest part isn't the repair work, it's knowing what came before. He's seen men dragged out of flooded compartments, burned alive in hangar fires, and blown apart by secondary explosions. Yet every time he walks through those same spaces now, clean, dry, humming again with life, he feels a grim pride. At one point, Commander Hare brings a small group of officers through the engineering decks to show the visiting repair teams how O'Flaherty's crew had kept the ship going. He gestures to the patchwork of pipes and couplings. "Gentlemen," Hare says, "this is what saved the Enterprise. These men made a ship out of scrap metal and prayer." Photographers from the Naval Historical Center arrive to document the damage for training purposes. Their images, now preserved in naval archives, show melted wiring, collapsed bulkheads, and decks scorched to bare steel. In nearly every photo, handwritten chalk notes read, "Temporary by Repair 5, Bypass installed 10/26 fire line rig, holds pressure. By mid-November, Enterprise is once again capable of launching aircraft. Her boilers, inspected and repaired, are cleared for full power. On November 11, 1942, she steams out of Noumea, just 16 days after nearly being lost, to rejoin the fleet. As she clears the harbor, sailors on surrounding ships line their rails in salute. From the pier, one of the vessel's engineers remarks to a correspondent, "If you want to know what holds that ship together, it isn't rivets. It's her crew." As the Big E heads back toward the Solomon Islands, her scars are still visible. But below decks, everything hums. Pumps, lights, turbines, all functioning because a handful of machinists refused to give up in the dark. O'Flaherty, now promoted to chief machinist, watches the horizon from the engineering hatch as the carrier cuts through calm seas. For the first time in weeks, the ship feels alive, steady, strong, defiant. He doesn't know it yet, but in the months ahead, Enterprise will fight again. At Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, and Leyte Gulf, earning more battle stars than any ship in the U.S. Navy. And when she does, she'll do it on the backbone of the same makeshift systems that saved her that day in October 1942. December 1942, mid-Pacific, en route to the Solomons. The USS Enterprise, CV-6, once written off as damaged beyond repair, now cuts through rolling swells under her own power, her decks once again launching aircraft into the dawn. The smell of aviation fuel mixes with salt air as Wildcats and Avengers roar skyward. The sound of catapults slamming and arrestor wires snapping taut has returned. The unmistakable rhythm of a living carrier at war. To the men aboard, it's almost unthinkable how far she's come since the Battle of Santa Cruz. For Chief Machinist Frank O'Flaherty and his damage control teams, the work that saved her is now invisible, buried behind fresh steel and new wiring. But every time the engines turn over or the pumps hum beneath the decks, those patched circuits and improvised lines still bear his mark. Enterprise's return to service is not just a morale victory. It is a strategic one. By December, she is the only operational American fleet carrier in the South Pacific, supporting operations at Guadalcanal, where U.S. Marines are still locked in brutal ground combat. Her surviving air groups, reinforced with replacement pilots, fly constant missions against Japanese shipping and airfields. Many of those sorties would not have been possible had O'Flaherty's jury-rigged systems failed weeks earlier. Official dispatches from Admiral William F. Halsey to Admiral Chester W. Nimitz record her performance. Enterprise continues to operate effectively despite prior damage. Engineering Division performance under Chief O'Flaherty exemplary. Their initiative under fire preserved the only major carrier asset available in the theater. Behind that simple praise lies an entire doctrine that would change U.S. naval warfare. Until Santa Cruz, Navy damage control procedures were largely standardized, rigid checklists designed for predictable emergencies. What happened aboard Enterprise rewrote those rules. The improvised seawater intakes, cross-connected fire mains, and rerouted power systems pioneered by O'Flaherty's team would become models for future damage control manuals in early 1943. Excerpts from Enterprise's damage reports were distributed to all Pacific Fleet carriers. One line in the Engineering Lessons Learned memorandum stands out. Innovation and courage under duress can accomplish what engineering blueprints cannot. For O'Flaherty and his men, the recognition comes quietly. No medals are pinned, no grand ceremonies held. But within the ship, his name carries weight. Sailors in later months would refer to any improvised fix in the machinery spaces as an O'Flaherty job. When Enterprise returns briefly to Pearl Harbor for extended refit in March 1943, naval engineers study her repairs in detail. Many of the temporary measures are found so effective that they're retained or standardized. The fire mains rerouting, in particular, is copied into newer carrier designs. A young lieutenant from the Bureau of Ships, examining the modifications, reportedly told a reporter from the Honolulu Advertiser, There's more practical engineering in those makeshift lines than in half our manuals. The Big E herself, patched and reinforced, soon becomes a legend. In every major Pacific engagement that follows, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, she fights again and again, absorbing bomb and kamikaze hits that would sink lesser ships. Each time, her damage control crews rise to the challenge, carrying forward the same ingenuity first shown at Santa Cruz, by war's end. Enterprise has earned 20 battle stars, more than any other U.S. ship of the conflict. She survives the entire war, battered but unbroken, and becomes known throughout the fleet as the Gray Ghost. A ship the Japanese repeatedly claimed to have sunk, only for her to reappear days later, launching another wave of bombers. When she returns to New York in 1945, her decks crowded with veterans of every major Pacific campaign, few among the cheering crowds on the pier realized that one of the quiet heroes of her survival was a machinist who worked in the heat and smoke below decks.in. Post-war interviews, officers would recall that night at Santa Cruz in awe. Commander Truxton Hare, Enterprise's damage control officer, told naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison in 1948, "We owed our survival to two things: training and Frank O'Flaherty's refusal to quit. Every time a system failed, he found a way to make it live again." That quote appears today in the U.S. Navy's archival collection under the file Damage Control, CV6, 1942. Even decades later, at naval academies and training schools, the story of the impossible fix remains a case study in crisis leadership and innovation under fire. It is still used in U.S. Navy Damage Control Training Center lectures to illustrate one principle above all: no ship is lost until her crew believes she is. Standing at the edge of history, the USS Enterprise became more than a carrier. She was a symbol of endurance. And beneath the decks where light barely reached, amid fire, smoke, and flooding steel, one chief machinist and his men proved that courage is not always measured in gunfire or medals, but in the steady hands that keep a dying ship alive through the longest night.